Hello and welcome to this video on turning an apple tree into a bonsai. This is part of a larger species that is used for creating bonsai, with the most common option being crab apples. For this video we have propagated these apple tree cuttings. Each is from a different heirloom cultivar. Some are mid-season fruit while others are late-season fruit. We chose these to provide longer flowering periods and hopefully be able to display them towards the end of autumn. You may choose to buy a singular cultivar or particular type that suits you, or that takes your fancy. The choice is going to be important since apples do behave somewhat differently between cultivars, and you need to check if it is a grafted example or not. Grafts are not necessarily a problem to becoming a bonsai, but you will need to do some extra work, and we'll discuss that at the end of the video, along with suggesting some possible species that are a good option. Starting with our stock, we can try anything. For shits and giggles, we will try to make a formal upright and informal upright. Something about an apple tree that looks like a Christmas tree with apple-shaped baubles is amusing. Both examples work well given our stock. You may wish to consider what cultivar is best for your location, as not all are created equally. This includes that not only growth occurs at different rates, but flowering, fruiting, and pests. You can take your tree in winter and prune the roots by about half. This is aggressive and far more than you will do it so again, but the tree is dormant and will not suffer as much. Do this at the end of winter and just before spring. Transfer it into a training pot at this point. Water the soil to make sure it fills any gaps and all the air has been pushed out. Use rich, well-draining soil that is very organic matter rich. Try not to use a very dry or very well-draining soil, or very wet, cloying soil. These are the only considerations with your choice of soil. It means you can buy any reasonable potting mix and it will be suitable for these purposes. You don't need specialized bonsai mix for this. In spring, you should begin to see leaf buds begin to break open. This is the first time to begin pruning. Prune back branches growing against your chosen style. In this case, branches diametrically opposed for an informal upright, and not in the right place for the formal upright. Essentially left, right, and back, repeat until the apex. With the unwanted branches removed, we can move on to the next step. Try to prune branches back to a single node. This will help with ramification. It also removes the need to wire. Doing this will give you more movement and growth early on, but it's not necessarily as stylized for a much longer period. You will eventually need to wire, but not until much later, and possibly once you've transplanted into a bonsai pot. This has some rather clear advantages and disadvantages. You could also choose the option of wiring and pruning instead of this much more simple approach. This would involve only removing unwanted growth and then wiring the branch into the right position. As you wire the branches, remember to come back and check on the branch. The apple tree will grow very quickly and strong early on. This can lead to wire cutting into the branch. The scars from this will not grow out very soon, and in some cases may not grow out at all. They will diminish, but they won't go away. You can fix this and encourage growth using sacrifice branches. These can encourage branch and trunk growth alongside nabari. Either way, styling your apple at this point should be well underway. Over summer, it won't do much, but the growth you developed should harden off and not prove liable to damage from wire or weather, or at least not as easily as its newer counterparts. Wire not being as much of a problem now means it should be used carefully but as needed for the season's branches. Watch what happens with your apple as autumn arrives. You want to make sure it has survived the first year and developed roots. Without these, you will not have a bonsai next year, as it will not survive winter and early spring. Note that buds are needed to produce leaves and flowers. You need leaf buds, and these should be at the end of the branch. Do not remove all buds when pruning. This is often done during winter, so you need to be careful in which branches you prune, when, and how. After the first year, you can begin to focus more on the style and possible flowers followed by fruit. Apples need to have a new growth for flowers and fruit. Start to prune with this in mind now. You should have the broad structure for a small bonsai already, and if not, you may wish to wait another year and continue styling. Focusing on having branches that can bear fruit and not break, and also produce flowers, is key early on. That means it's also time to focus on ramification again. Try to prune for ramification and focus on one side of the fork you are pruning each season. This will give you one shortened branch that will not flower, and one longer branch that will flower. Swap these the next season and continue to swap every year. This will not only balance growth, but styling and flowering that leads to fruit. Unlike some other fruiting species, you will need to remove excess fruit. Too much creates a range of problems. The biggest is going to be that it can cause branches to break. A small amount of fruit is better than the loss of a whole branch. Do note that the tree may do very well one year, but poorly the next, and this poor display of flowers and fruit is obviously going to be something of a disappointment. Removing excess flowers, and then removing excess fruit again after that, it can help to create a more consistent display year on year. It may not be as impressive, but it is more consistent. Now you can look at transferring the apple into a bonsai pot. Again, waiting until winter is best. This is when the tree is dormant and you can remove about a third of the root ball. In the first year of potting into a bonsai pot, the tree may struggle or be somewhat slower in reacting and growing. This is partially due to the loss of that third of its root mass, but also a somewhat new environment. Despite this, you will be able to keep your bonsai apple tree in a bonsai pot for up to 5 years with larger pots, and certainly somewhat larger trees, but it could be as little as 2 years for smaller pots with larger trees in them. Remember to use an organic matter-rich soil that drains freely but retains moisture. This is because the apple will grow quickly, will grow aggressively, and it will try to flower and fruit. These all are very intensive activities, and so you need to replace the material available, not only by ensuring it has lots of material in organic matter, but also fertilizer. The pests common to apple bonsai include aphids, which can be dealt with as per usual, generally the application of pesticide. The scale is very similar, again pesticide. Borers are handled with topical and systemic pesticides, but your bonsai should be quarantined if there are signs of this. Grafted apple cultivars, and particularly most of the commercially available, tend to be a bit of a challenge. They're often grafted to dwarfing stock. This is useful as there's a larger tree early on, but it's also kept to a smaller size over the long term. Obviously, the graft is never perfect, and it's rather obvious in most cases. Our heirloom cultivars were originally grafted to such dwarfing stock. These cuttings are not, and so we can ignore this. You may not be so positioned. The first possible option is the use of a sacrifice branch. This can somewhat outgrow the graft for you. This will cover it and generally minimize the obvious signs of a graft. Your second option, depending on how the tree is set up and positioned, is to air layer the tree and remove the apple tree from the rootstock, which is often a much more difficult option and obviously is going to take longer. Finally, you can try to develop gin or shari that will hide the graft. We do have a whole video on the ways other than these that you can use to hide signs of a graft one way or another. As far as options go, crabapple is used because it is a fast-growing species or cultivar of apple. And particularly, it does tend to put out a lot of flowers, puts on a lot of fruit, and it is small fruit. You tend to not have anywhere near the same kind of worries as you would with something else like some sort of cultivar meant for eating on a regular basis. By contrast to this, you can go with some of the more standard cultivars. This is often something you're going to have to look at on a region-by-region basis, as not all cultivars are good for your particular area. Some that we could suggest may turn out to be the absolutely wrong option, but talking to someone in your local nursery, bonsai society, club or similar, you should get an idea as to what is a good option for you. Something that can tolerate cold in some areas, warmth in others, extremes in temperature depending on where you live in the world. Any of these are things to ask about. For us, this is why we have a variety of heirloom cultivars available. Not every year will every cultivar work well. In fact, we've had several that for several years in a row have refused to put on flowers or fruit. This isn't really a problem as we have several of each variety, so We don't need to worry about those if the others instead are putting on plenty of apples in their place. This is a consideration for you as well. If you want to have a reliable display every year, you may want to choose multiple different cultivars to train at the same time. This will ensure that at least one each year, if you have enough, will be exhibition ready. A well-styled and cared for apple bonsai can be a stunning display for 3 months of the year, if not all year round. The foliage as it emerges is bright green. It flowers over spring and into summer. There is the autumnal change in leaf colour and the fruit alongside that. A well-styled specimen can have amazing bare branch structure which can be a great winter exhibit. No season is the same as any other, and this is a particular variety that over the year will change drastically as it grows and develops. You don't necessarily need to focus on having it as a flowering and fruiting bonsai. You can choose to have it as a more typical bonsai, where the focus is branch structure and foliage alone. This is simply one way that you can add a little bit more flash and colour to your bonsai collection without necessarily needing to go to a great deal more effort. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.